Actually, I had a really big problem growing up as a child. During the day, I was busy studying in school like everyone else, and I had this vision that I wanted to become a guy like this, a physicist in CERN, because I was super interested in solving, or at least being a part of solving, physics' largest problem today, which is how do we combine relativity theory with quantum mechanics? And I remember walking up to my teacher already in 8th grade in physics and asking him, you know, it's really great that we learn how to go from volts to amperes and all those things, but what about the relativity of simultaneity? And he told me we can talk about that a little bit later, so I must have been a really annoying child back in Karlskoga. And I took all these extra classes in math and science because I was preparing to go to CERN and be a part of building this accelerator. But as soon as school was over, I got on my bike and I biked over to another school, the School of Culture, Kulturskolan in Karlskoga. And there I did a completely different thing. I was singing, I was dancing, because I loved telling stories. I remember even in high school, I decided to make a dance performance of a book called The Little Prince. I really stood out in a working class, small city in Karlskoga, not in a cool way, but people did remember me. But this wasn't my big problem, because my big problem was really that I knew that these days would come to an end. I couldn't be a professional physicist and a professional dancer at the same time. I had to make a choice. And fortunately, I had a very caring mother. She's here, by the way. Hey, Mom. And as all caring mothers tend to do, they give advice. And so she gave me the advice that I don't care about what you do as long as you make some money from your work. And so really the decision was kind of made there, right? I wasn't going to become a dancer. But even though for years and years I was preparing to be this physics student, I knew that there was something missing in my choice. And I remember sitting at my desk with my application, filling out the whole year before I was going to start university. It was Teknisk Fysik, technical physics, at the Royal Institute of Technology. But I never finished it. And I kept my KTH catalog by my desk, and some days I would turn the pages, and one day a fold-in slipped out of my catalog. And there was this really pretty picture. Leif, do you remember this picture? He remembers this picture because this was the picture that was in the catalog, and on it it said they were starting a new program. It was so new that they didn't have time to include it in the catalog. So they just put in an extra leaflet into the catalog. Malin, you remember this as well, right? And it said, this will be a program where we'll combine society and technology. And I realized that this was an opportunity for me to actually combine the things that I loved. Analytical thinking on one hand, and creative expression on the other. So I filled out a new application on the last day that you could fill out the application to university. I handed it in, and a couple of days later, I was on my way to Stockholm to start my education. There was just one problem. That when my mother came and asked me, how are you going to make money from this? I had no clue. But I thought, you know, KTH, Royal Institute of Technology, they're a reliable brand. They will know what to do. And I remember arriving at campus and meeting my professor for the first time. And to my shock, hear him say, "Welcome. You're the new and first class of media technologists. We have an idea of what we're going to do next week, but not so much after. We are going to co-create this thing together." Fortunately, my mom wasn't there for that lecture. But that was actually one of the key things I learned here at this institution. Discovering the unknown and making a habit of exploring things that didn't really come easily. And I soon started to find out that there are other people like me, like my co-founders in Prezi. Here's Adam and HP. Adam, who graduated from this institution, but the architect school. He was one of these guys. But he wasn't really an architect because he loved making people smile and creating beautiful visualizations, creating spaces inside of computers. And at that time, architects didn't really do that. So people called him an artist, not an architect. And HP, he's an engineer in electrical engineering that has never built a switch in his entire life. But he figured out that circuits can be really good at transferring not just bits, but culture. So he built the first translation engine between Hungarian and English, and databases for lectures, where you could store videos. So when the three of us came together to start thinking about Prezi, in the middle of the largest recession in 2008. Remember, people were comparing it to the 1920s. Then the idea of taking on Apple, Microsoft, and Google from an unexpected place like Budapest in Hungary did not seem very far-fetched for us at all. It's just been the same thing that we had done all our lives, which was to do the unknown thing. So, of course, we couldn't convince any investors to invest in this idea, so we had to figure out how to build this first version of a product for a full year. But after a year, we were done. And I went to one of those startup competitions. It was in Amsterdam, and it was 3,000 people in the audience, and there were plenty of entrepreneurs there, and all of them wanted to pitch their idea because that would be a way to become famous. And of course, me having gone without a salary for a year, I knew I had to make it count. But how was I going to stand out? Well, I decided to not have the sneakers and the t-shirt that I always was wearing and that everyone else was wearing at the conference, but I put on a suit and a tie. And I did stand out again. And by the time I got to the stage, I had a brilliant idea, which was to pull my tie and say that slides are like ties are. They can be confining. But if you find a way to break loose from the ties, then a whole new world of creativity opens up. And then I revealed Prezi, and after 5 minutes, the moderator came and asked the audience, how many of you would be willing to pay for this product? And half of all the audience members raised their hand. That was really the first moment in time that we knew that we were onto something. And from there on, with Prezi, things went very quick. The next day, TechCrunch, which is the most important technology blog, published this article. It said that Prezi is the coolest presentation tool ever. And then the investors started to come along. Excel, who were the first investors in Facebook, they wanted to invest. TED, that had never invested in a company before, wanted to invest. And we opened up offices around the world, and things went beyond our wildest expectations. Today, we have the world's largest database of publicly available presentations that have been viewed over 1 billion times. And we've created jobs. This is the team, 250 people of them. But it's not just the jobs inside of Prezi, it's jobs outside of Prezi. It's companies that provide training and consulting based on Prezi. It's authors who write books, 83 books that have been written about how to create beautiful Prezi presentations. There are even cartoons that show how to make Prezi presentations. And this, my friend, was a dream situation. I was sitting in the audience at TED, seeing, yes, Bono. Can you see? Bono. Presenting using Prezi and talking about how to eradicate poverty in the world. Honestly speaking, after that, meeting this guy seemed like ordinary business. And all of that happened really because we went on really uncharted paths. Now, some of you might think that we were lucky and that we worked really hard, and I think both of those things are true. But I think the Prezi story is actually a story about a much bigger change that's happening in the world, a change that all of us here are a part of. And there is a really good chart to illustrate what this change is. This chart here shows you the average company lifespan on the Standard & Poor's 500 companies. So what it shows is essentially that in the 1960s, it took about little over 60 years for a company to get started and to be a globally successful company. Fast forward to today, we see that that number is a mere 16, 18 years. And if we project out into the future, it's expected to be even smaller. Let's go back to the 1960s. When my mom graduated from university, she probably thought that she'd be working with the same company perhaps for the rest of her life. None of us in this room believes that, right? This is a big change just in one generation. How can we understand this change? Well, there's a great example from 2012. 2012, a company called Kodak went bankrupt. They were then a 130 years old company. Ton of experiences, ton of money, yet they go bankrupt. Same year, another company that is in the same business, they're in the photo sharing business, gets bought for $1 billion. But at the time, they're a 2-year-old company, 13 employees, 30-something. You guys know which one? Yeah, Instagram. What this tells us is that in today's economy, creativity might trump experience. And when I talk about creativity, then a lot of people get anxious. Because creativity, that's something that we associate with geniuses like Einstein and Dali, right? That's something that you have to have the star aligns when you're born, and then perhaps you can be creative. But what I've learned in the last few years with Prezi is that creativity has much more to do with our mindset, with how we approach problems, rather than how we were born. There are 3 questions that I've learned from the Prezi users who tend to be very creative people that if you say yes to, that I would argue that you are a creative person. If you can say that you're intrinsically motivated, that you can make yourself vulnerable, that you can challenge basic assumptions, then I would say that you are practicing a creative mindset. And how can that be utilized? Well, let's take Spotify as an example. Another company that got started here at this school. You see, Daniel Ek could probably say yes to all three of these questions. I don't know if you know this, but he's passionate about rock music. He just realized that he sucked at playing the guitar. But he was an engineer and he could apply that to his passion. First, check. And then he made himself really vulnerable. For those of us who were here actually in '99 when we started, you might remember that every one of us were listening to music through pirated channels. But Daniel, he said, you know what? I don't think this is okay. It's illegal and the artists aren't getting paid. And saying to your friends that what they're doing is not okay, that's not a popular thing to do. And then he challenged a really basic assumption. You see, you could listen to music for free on the radio. Why couldn't you on the internet? I mean, we could gather a big database of music and then splice in ads just like on the radio, let people choose their own music. Bada bim, bada boom. Multi-billion-dollar company used everywhere around the world. Creative mindsets can be powerful. And they don't just build companies, they can change entire countries. The most beautiful example of how an entire country can change thanks to a creative mindset comes from little Estonia. You know, Estonia has a lot in common with the country where my parents were born, which is Hungary. Right after the Soviet Union fell, Estonia became independent, and people were pretty disillusioned by their future. You see, north of Estonia, you have Finland, a really competitive and rich country. West of Estonia, you have Sweden, a really competitive and rich country. And how are you going to be competitive based on 1.5, 1.4 million people with these countries? No wonder that people were a little bit pessimistic about their future. But then a few years later, a really famous company came along, which you probably know. And they started building their technology in Estonia. And after Skype was sold, then of course a lot of people got rich. But more important than the money itself was the example that Skype had on Estonia. Because you see, with Skype, Estonians started to believe that they could be globally competitive, not based on the resources they had, not based on the experiences that they had, but by the creative ideas that they could bring to the world. And fast forward a couple of years, now The Economist names Estonia as the most entrepreneurial country in Europe. Not Sweden, not Finland, Estonia. That's how you pass by Sweden in a matter of a few years. But this revolution isn't just happening in Stockholm, in Estonia, in Silicon Valley. It's happening in Budapest as well. Today, there are 4 globally competitive, rapidly scaling companies that has come out of Budapest. LogMeIn, that's more than $1 billion worth, and on NASDAQ, trading on NASDAQ. Ustream, serving 80 million people with mobile streaming. NNG, a lot of the cars that we drive have GPS data and maps, thanks to this company. And Prezi, well, we brought a Hungarian word to the whole world. And also, the world has come to Budapest, thanks to Prezi. because in our offices in Budapest, over 30 different nationalities have joined from East and West to be working on a mission for better communication and with a creative mindset. So I'd like to encourage you all to take advantage of this time, because never ever has there been a better time to build a globally successful company than today. Do more of the things that you love. Make yourself vulnerable and challenge assumptions, and we will prove together that creativity trumps experience. Thank you.